Welcome to Business Innovators Radio, featuring industry influencers and trendsetters sharing proven strategies to help you build a better life right now.
Hi, this is Tammy Patzer, and I am happy to welcome Brian M. Douglas. He is an estate planning attorney in Atlanta, Georgia. He assists clients in all areas of life and wealth planning. And today we're going to be talking with Brian M. Douglas about business succession planning. Welcome, Brian.
Thanks, Tammy. That's a mouthful. You've said it already, and we're going to probably say it a couple more times, but I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Well, thank you. First of all, let's just kind of give the audience an overview of what business succession planning is, and then we'll get into my formal questions.
Sure. So business succession planning is, by definition, is just that. It's the planning of how your business will succeed beyond you. What do you want to happen to your business? This country is founded, and every day I think the small businesses in this country really keep the country together. You know, huge corporations, publicly traded companies, they're important. You know, we have them in our stock portfolios and things like that. They have boards of directors, and they have all the committees and the rules and the oversights because they're publicly traded, and they operate kind of on a different level. And those companies always have a continuity plan in place because no one actually owns the company. The shareholders own the company, and there could be millions of shares of stock, and then they of course elect boards of directors to run it, and there's always going to continue to go forward, and they change and move people. But the small businesses out there, which really is the bedrock of what I think our economy is based on, you don't have that. You have people that, you know, mom and pops, for lack of a better term, that started businesses because they were really good, or they had a great idea, or they just worked hard because they had to feed their family because that's all they could do. And they grow these businesses and sometimes into those huge companies that go publicly traded. I mean, you look at Microsofts and Apples and companies like that started in garages and basements and warehouses. Those really were the same thing. And look at where they are now. I mean, some of the most wealthy, you know, highly traded companies on the stock exchanges. But until you reach that level to where you have that level of sophistication and oversight, you have so many companies out there that basically are just people get up and go to work every day, and it might be the gas station or the dry cleaner, or the, you know, whatever it may be, the construction company, whatever, the auto mechanic, and they just go up and go to work every day, and that's what they do. But you run into that time where you may want to stop working for some reason. You may want to retire. You may want to pass the baton down to the next generation. You may want to sell out altogether and just take the money and go and live on a beach somewhere, or whatever your retirement goals are. And that's what the business succession planning is. You have to start the planning long before the time comes that you want to walk away, because it never really works out that well. And you can hurt yourself in the long run if you don't put the planning in place and put the effort in a year, 2 years, 3 years ahead of time, which seems like a long time, but it really isn't when you think about it, because people that have, and I want to say regular jobs, meaning they go to work for a company or for someone else, they're thinking about retirement all the time. They're paying in their Social Security, they're doing their 401ks, and they're doing all that stuff that the companies offer, which is their retirement plan. Well, your business is your retirement plan as well, and you need to think about that a number of years before you ever plan to walk away, to maximize your returns and to get as much out of that business as you want.
Wow, I'm just thinking about that because, for example, my business is about 7 years old, and of course it's been, you know, fairly small business. But what if I want to bring a children or family member in, a son or a daughter? What would the steps be that I would take to start making these plans, so that if I choose to leave the business to a family member, I can do that. And of course, I could always have that other option of selling it, to a stranger. But if I want to work within my family, what would my steps be?
I think this is a very personal decision, of course, because it crosses the lines between business and family and your relationship with children, and there can be other emotional and different complexities that exist. But if it were me, and when I advise my clients to start at the bottom with their children, son or daughter, whomever they're bringing in. And then I don't mean that in a bad way and like they have to earn their way up or whatever. But what I mean is when you built that business, Tammy, you started at the bottom. You started from scratch. You had nothing. You had an idea in your head. You were making, you could be making trinkets in the back room of your house or on your dining room table evenings and weekends. You didn't have this whole business that was running and going, and you grew it every step of the way. You know how to do every job that exists in there because you built all those jobs and you designed it and you designed the processes and procedures and best practices, all of those things. And so I think that anyone that's coming into the business, especially if the idea is to pass the baton, they really need to have that level of understanding of every area of the business. We all are very, for lack of a better term, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but we're all very hedonistic with instant gratification, right? We get the internet, I can Google something and in 0.6 seconds, I can have 300 million, responses on Google to one question I type in. So we all like to fast forward and kind of get to the punchline, right? But there's so much merit that goes involved in the journey, right? It's not the end, it's the journey getting there. So that would be the first thing, is really bring them in and do that. Don't bring your child in and make them the senior vice president of marketing or whatever and give them a title and a paycheck and a company car because they're your kid because you can do that and no one can tell you not to do it. I think generally when those things happen, you're setting yourself or them up for failure, or ultimately, and sadly, I've seen kids run businesses into the ground when they come in and take that approach because they just have the money just keeps coming in. Well, it keeps coming in until mom or dad leave. And then the kid's there steering the ship and they don't know how to do it anymore and they run it into the ground. And that's, of course, not what anybody wants. It's kind of the law of unintended consequences. So that's where I would start with children coming into the business, is have them learn the business from the ground up. And doesn't mean you have to spend, if it took you 10 years to build your business, doesn't mean they have to spend 10 years getting from zero to where you want them to be running at the top. But they need to really work all of the areas and understand it.
So that brings actually two different scenarios to mind. And so it's actually two questions woven into one. On one side of the coin, with an established business that may have established employees who are not relatives, the question for that would be, how do you bring your family members in without upsetting the proverbial apple cart of those loyal employees? So how would you combat that nepotism? And then also on the other side is, what about sometimes a business may have family members who have been involved, and then here comes the kids. Maybe the kids were little and now they're grown up and it's time for them to step into those roles. How would you, what advice would you have for those two different scenarios?
Yeah, nepotism is always a problem whenever you have the non-family employees and family employees, because there's always that concern of insider trading, right? You guys know each other, and you're going to treat your kids better or whatever the case may be. I can tell you a story. When I was 15, my dad and my stepmother owned a restaurant, and so I went to work in a restaurant. They gave me a job working in the kitchen and washing dishes and doing things like that. And the way they combated it, quite frankly, and it's not, this isn't legal, this isn't scientific, it just is kind of reality, it's pragmatic, was they were just tougher on me than everybody else. And they were openly about it. And they told me, they said, listen, I'm going to hold you to a higher standard than anyone else that works here. And everyone's going to see it. You're not, it's not going to be behind closed doors. You don't get special treatment. If anything, you're going to get harder treatment, because we don't want anyone else to feel like their favorites being played, or that you're getting special treatment. So that is definitely one way to do it. I think transparency is really the best way to combat that, though. And meaning you talk with everybody, you explain, everyone understands the roles, you have a procedure in place, whether it's written job descriptions, and this is what's expected of everybody. And that there's a just like any other employee, you wouldn't expect your other employees to pick up the slack for a different employee, nor would you expect them to pick up the slack for one of your children. And you're very transparent with the other employees, and you let them know that if there is a problem, they can come and talk to you about it. And there's no retribution, there's no fear of any sort of retaliation if you come and say, my kid's not doing his job, and that you're the one pulling the weight. Like, I want to know that, because I'm not going to give my child something that I worked so hard on, and blood, sweat, and tears and sacrifices I made. to let them run it into the ground intentionally. Things happen, economies happen. That's 2008 was an eye opener for us all. So things can happen to businesses, no doubt. But I'm not going to let somebody that destroy what I work so hard for because I'm afraid to let my other employees come and tell me what they see when they work side by side with my child or whomever it may be.
Right. I mean, you can Donald Trump would probably be a good example, when he brought his children onto the Apprentice TV show. So you could see how they were kind of trained in the sense of business and fairness. What about the family members who benefit from the business, but maybe they don't come into the office on a day-to-day, yet they have some say in the business because, maybe they benefit in some way. How would all of that be handled within the business?
Yeah. So to your point, there are businesses where maybe each of the children own a percentage of it, but some of the children might work in the business, but others may not. Sister may be staying at home with her children, but she has a 10% interest in the business because mom and dad gave each of the kids a fractional ownership or whatever. But brother may be, he may be right there with dad working, day in and day out. Again, I think transparency is the theme for that, and just having honest conversations with your children about what everyone's doing, what the roles are, and what everyone gets as a result of that. Generally, if you're in business, you understand that if you work hard, if you put your time in, if you pay your dues, the reward comes back for you. And most people in business never expect something for nothing. We have all worked hard. We all go in and roll up our sleeves every single day and do something. So we don't just show up and wake up and say, oh, well, Tammy, just send me a check because I'm a nice guy. Business owners don't generally think that way. So it's not really foreign thinking for them to think and to understand that because son works in the business and daughter doesn't, that son should be compensated in a different way or whatever. The problem comes in is, and I've got two daughters, so I can tell you, they look at you with those big blue eyes and it gets tough. I mean, the problem comes in, it's me as a human being, right? It's the reality of me looking at my daughter and telling them, no, you don't get the same, or the rules are different for your brother, or whatever, for the other child and not for you. And that transcends everything. That exists when we talk about estate planning. That exists when we talk about business succession planning. That exists just across the board. I mean, I've had clients in my conference room and I've basically told them, it's not my opinion. You're not asking my opinion, or you're asking my opinion, and I can't tell you what to do. But I would not do that with that child. Everything you've told me about that particular child, you need to have a hard conversation with them, or we put some safeguards in place because that child is a spendthrift, or that child seems to have a propensity to abuse drugs and alcohol. So we got to be really careful with them. And people sometimes at the personal level have a hard time doing that. So it's certainly not something that's unique to the business succession planning or the fairness of it all, because everyone wants to be fair with their children. I treat all my kids the same. We all say it, we all do it, and we try to do it. But sometimes you have to be able to put things in different boxes and draw those lines, almost like, you mentioned Donald Trump. It certainly would be an interesting, study to think about how he would handle that. And if one of the children wasn't contributing, I don't think anyone on the planet would think that Donald would treat that child the same as the ones that were contributing. Not that he's a heartless guy, not that he's a bad father, but just that, he's very pragmatic and very, orderly when it comes to business, which is what you have to be. You have to be able to put things into different boxes or different compartments and keep them there. And then it doesn't mean you can't still have a great birthday party or go on family vacations or whatever, but, you have to be able to segregate sometimes, and that can be very difficult.
I can see that. So what about, you mentioned about how Microsoft and Apple started out in garages, and obviously we now know they're just these huge conglomerates. And even, Amazon is probably another good example of that. But as the family business grows, what happens when the business does outgrow the family? How do you bring in the outside talent to help out so that these different decisions can be made, like you brought up several different case scenarios. What if you have a person who's just not business minded, or what about the the family member who is addicted to drugs and alcohol? How do you bring in these outside people who are not members of the family to help, so that your business stays intact?
Yeah, so I think that requires an honest conversation with yourself or maybe with your spouse, or you look in the mirror and you got to think about it. And what I mean by that is you have to honestly decide what you're good at, and you have to be honest with yourself. And we're all good at different things. We all excel at certain things. I've always been a math person, which is kind of funny because most attorneys, admittedly, aren't very good at math. But I was a mechanical engineer before I was an attorney. So some people, though, don't get math, right? Some people just struggle with the concept of mathematics, but they're good at other things that maybe I'm not good at. So you have to just acknowledge where your strengths and weaknesses are. And sometimes there's a process in doing that. It also comes down to what you like doing and what you don't like doing. But when the company starts to grow and get bigger, you've already hit the nail on the head, which is, and it goes without saying, you have to bring in the professionals, right? I know what I know, and I know what I don't know, or at least I think I know what I don't know, or I know what I don't know kind of thing. And that's where I got to start filling in the gaps and searching for those professionals. And then it's what am I good at? What is my role? How do I want my role to be? Versus what can I hire? What kind of talent can I bring in from the outside? And again, it can be a hard decision to make because, control freak is kind of the term that everyone uses. And I don't think it's a fair term, but we're all very hands-on as business owners. Doesn't mean we're control freaks, but we're just used to getting up and doing it ourselves because we did it ourselves every single day. And so we're not used to giving somebody the checkbook and saying, here, don't steal all my money and pay the bills and do all that. Like it's nerve-wracking. I'm the same way. We're all the same way. I mean, I think, entrepreneurs and small business owners generally are cut from the same cloth. So some of it is giving up control. It's not a negative thing. And like I said, people would say control freak, and I disagree with that assessment. But it's really figuring out what areas you're strong in, what areas you're not. I mean, if you're a good marketing person, then you should focus your efforts on marketing, and as opposed to, being the technician, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. There's a number of books on those types of topics that have been around for a while, and those themes are out there in different business books and by different coaching things. But they're all on point, which is do what you do and do what you do best and do what makes you the most money, and there should be some enjoyment, of course, too. And then find other people to do the other things and fill in those gaps. But it's definitely seeking the advice of professionals. My saying is discounts come at a price, right? They always do. I mean, and if you're okay with that, that's fine. But there's some things I'm not paying a discount for, right? And like, for example, if I'm going skydiving and you're going to sell me a parachute, Tammy, that's 50% off, but only works 75% of the time, I'm going to pay 100% for the one that works 99.999% of the time, right? There are certain places where I'm going to take the discount and certain ones that I'm not. So I think that's where you really have to bring in the outside help, bring in professionals, and attorneys that work with small businesses, CPAs that work with small businesses, putting that team together, even financial advisors that work with small businesses. Hopefully, as your business has grown, you've made relationships with some of these people, and they can introduce you to other people. I'm not saying they're the ones that are going to answer all your questions. Like, you don't have to come to your attorney and say, hey, I need a comptroller for my firm. What do I do? Like, I don't know. I mean, maybe I know someone's comptroller, but I mean, I'm not a recruiter or whatever, but I may know places and resources for you because I work with so many small businesses. I always kind of joke, I'd rather read the book than write the book, even though I've written 2 books already. When I'm trying to figure things out, it's so much easier to take a page and use from other people's experience and go to professionals who have done this once or 100 times, or who do this every day with other clients, than it is to forge your own path and do it by trial and error, because you'll get there eventually, but it'll take you so much longer and it'll cost you so much more money. Start with the experts in mind, go and find those people and use them as resources in their networks, and then reach out to and fill in those gaps for the talent that you're trying to acquire from outside the family.
That's really interesting because you do have to rely on other people, beyond yourself. And I think that's, like you said, for some people, that's a hard thing to learn. So with businesses, what are some choices that, I don't know if choice is the exact word or not, but what are the choices available to a business owner as he or she plans their estate and transferring interest in a family business, let's say, let's keep it in the family, what would they be looking at in terms of making plans to keep the business in the family?
Sure. So if they want to keep the business in the family and the children are going to run it, or even if they're not, but really they want it to be a family-owned business, and they may turn over the management and to mostly outside people, but still have the family own it. You do that a lot of the ways through the corporate structures that you've set up to begin with. So you've set up an LLC or a corporation or a series of them. You may have multiple LLCs or corporations that deal with all the various aspects of the business. And then, the ownership of those LLCs would be divided in a way that makes sense for what you're trying to accomplish. You can then couple that ownership. We may do trust planning, meaning there's a trust that Tammy personally owns. She has her family trust and she has her business that we put, instead of Tammy owning the business, we say the trust owns the business and Tammy's just the beneficiary of the trust. And I know I'm kind of getting complicated here in diagrams and pictures I would be drawing on my conference table if you were sitting in front of me right now, and I could show everybody this on video. But you move the things around. So then the trust is one of the vehicles you use to plan your estate, and it plans your whole estate. It plans, anything you own. Well, what do you own? You own a business. Okay. So now your business gets moved into the trust. I mean, the business still is the business. It's still in a corporation or some sort of corporate entity, but the trust that you have that's part of your estate plan owns your interest in that business. And then if something happens to you, the trust has all the rules in place that say what happens to your assets. And in a business is an asset just like anything else. It's just in a different form.
Interesting. So here's a question. Obviously, some of us have younger children. I think you said that you had 2 small children. What if you wanted to plan for them, but they're not yet old enough to, be part of the family business? So how would you design a plan for succession of the leadership of a family business from, an older generation to a younger generation?
Sure. It gets complicated if you don't have the people that you can truly identify, meaning the family members that you can identify that say, well, then, Bill's going to be the CEO, or that you're going to have the kind of the battlefield order, the generals and all of that. So it can get a little bit more complicated in that respect. But with the trust planning that we talked about and with the ownership of the business, so if I own 100% of my business, and I put that into my trust, and my trust says when I die, because my trust will say where all of my assets go. It may say my house gets sold and the money gets divided. It may say if I had a lot of people have lake houses, right? So, but they want, I have a good friend that his parents bought a lake house in the 70s here in Georgia, and they wanted, when they passed away, they had so many great memories, they wanted to keep that in the family. So they put in their trust that lake house couldn't be sold for like 40 years or something, because they wanted their kids to grow up and then have their grandchildren there, and everybody have use of the lake house because it had such special memories to them. So you can basically dissect your assets and you can spin them off into different directions. So in your trust, you would say that I own this business, and that business stays in trust, and these are the people that are in charge of overseeing that asset. Now, it doesn't mean that, so if I made Tammy my trustee for that business, it doesn't mean Tammy is the CEO of the company. It doesn't mean that Tammy, does any, you may not even do anything with the business, but you may be in charge of making sure there is a CEO there. Like you would then do what I couldn't do, which is go and find, because I'd be gone or whatever the case may be, or maybe, in the hospital or something. You would go and find that talent that we talked about a moment ago to run the business and to run that company so that the business can continue on. And my trust says that's at that point. And then I would draft provisions in there, if and when, children, grandchildren reach a certain age, they have a right to enter the business, so on and so forth. And you would then design that out how you envision it with the information that you have available. So I could do that for my children and allow them to enter the business at a certain age. Put a rule book in place and a structure around how they would enter it, what the definitions would be. Now, when they're 18 years old, maybe I let them come into my business. That doesn't mean they're going to be CEO and CFO and and all that stuff, but they're going to have an entryway into it, and they'd eventually work their way up, and they could take it over or they could do whatever. But you also run into a situation: what if they don't want to?
Right. What do you do if
my,
they don't want
yeah,
to?
my 3-year-old like loves Curious George and Doc McStuffin. So I don't know if she's going to be like an animal doctor. I don't know what she's going to be, but the odds are she's probably not going to be a lawyer. She may not want to have anything to do with what I do, and that's fine. So I'd spend all this time drafting it, and it's there if she wants it. But if not, then that's the other side of the coin, right? You draft the flip side, which is if the children don't want to do it, they inherit the business in some way. As owners, they inherit and benefit from that. But then the structures out there that exist through the corporate documents as well as the trust documents that I have in place to allow the outside talent to continue to do it and to run it and do whatever. And if whoever I leave it to decides that it's to be sold, number one, I have to give them permission to do that. So in my planning, I may say you can sell it, or I may say you can't sell it because I want it to go on generationally. It's a kind of business that's going to last for a long time. And I don't want my kids to grow up and wait until they turn 18 and say, wow, we're selling dad's business and we're each going to get, $20 million and we're going to move on down the road. Kind of an interesting story that may relate to that is the Smith family used to own the Atlanta Falcons. And the Smith family is a Coca-Cola family here in Atlanta. And when the father had passed away, the ex-Coke CEO, when he passed away, basically the Falcons became for sale, and there was a number of entities that approached the Falcons to buy it, and they all came with different prices and different terms. But then Arthur Blank, who was the guy that started Home Depot, one of the founders and the CEO, he approached him, and he approached him, but he offered him way less money than everybody else. But they took Arthur Blank's deal. And so that's how he got the Falcons. But it's ironic because he got it at a discount. But the reason he got it at a discount was because he offered all cash, which meant the beneficiaries, the heirs of the Smith family, they got paid out right away. All the other people groups that were coming in to buy the Atlanta Falcons were offering it cash plus some financing. They wanted terms back. And that didn't put as much money in the pockets of the children. So it's kind of interesting that, money talks and cash is king. They wanted that money. And so they actually sold for a lesser price, but it netted them more money right then and there because of what they, and that's what they wanted at that time. So that's how Arthur Blank ended up buying the Falcons, 10 years ago or however long it's been.
That's interesting. Like you said, cash is king. So let's say that you decide you want to retire, and instead of worrying about your family, you just want to retire. I've noticed it's interesting. I've noticed a couple businesses locally that have been in business for, let's say, 75 years or a long, long time. And I noticed that sometimes I see that they will sell it. Sometimes I see they just close their doors. Mm-hmm. And I'm often wondering, what's that all about? Does that tell you anything if someone, rather than sell it, that they just close it?
Well, there are a lot of businesses that exist today that are relied upon solely for their income by the people that run it. And what I mean by that is, take me for example. I own a law firm. I'm a lawyer. So the value in my business, what is it really? Like, I don't have products. I don't have inventory. I don't have equipment. I don't have anything like that I could really sell. I mean, I have office furniture, but used office furniture is a dime a dozen. There's no money in anything I have in here, really. I mean, it's worth something, but not much. But what do I have? Well, you've got client lists and you've got, these relationships and all that. And that's great. But that's the key, right? The key is the relationship. People that I work with do business with me, namely because of who I am, because I'm involved. And so the question then becomes, if I were to sell my law firm, which I could, it's ironic, nobody thinks about it, but you can sell a law firm. It happens, somewhat often. But what would someone be buying? Well, they'd be buying all the relationships that Brian had with all of his people and his clients. But would those relationships last, or were they such personal relationships that as soon as Brian's gone, there goes the relationship? And I think you see that more and more now in the world that we live in, because we live in an information world, we live in an intangible world. There's technology, all these things. We're not making widgets or products or anything. Whatever it is. We don't. That tangible side is gone. A lot of these businesses are very, very personal in nature, and the business is worth, a big portion of the value of the business is related to the person that owns it and runs it every day. And if they leave, that value goes away. I've worked with deals where we've sold that type of business, But part of the sale would be to the new owners. The new owners would put a contingency in there that the existing owners and management had to stay on staff and work for 5 years or whatever it is in order to basically transition it over, because the new owners knew that without that person staying on board, that they could very quickly lose a lot of the business. So you'll see those things happen from time to time. I think being realistic about the value of your business, it's a hard thing, because my business is always worth more to me than it is to you. Why? Because it's personal to me. I mean, blood, sweat, and tears, sacrifices. I've nurtured it. I planted the seed a long time ago, and it's growing, and I've protected it, and I will continue to do so. So there's an emotional side of it, that makes it that way. So that's maybe the other problem, which is people see, they go on the market or they call a business broker, and they didn't start, like we talked about earlier. They didn't maybe start soon enough in the process of planning a succession. So the business broker comes in, looks around, and says, "Yeah, your business isn't worth anything, or it's worth very, very little." Because those types of businesses, all you really have are financials to go off of. If you don't have any other products or inventories to sell, you've got to try to sell whatever assets you have. And if the assets is, well, Brian gets up every day and talks on the phone and calls people and builds these relationships, that's not really an asset, because you can't buy Brian, because Brian's trying to leave. Brian doesn't want to do it anymore. So that's where, some businesses like that, they close down or go out of business. That's where they happen, or there just may be no market for it. If you look at, look at the small clothing stores and things like that. All the small towns used to have it. The shopping malls came along, the big department stores. Those changed the dynamic for that store. People don't go to that small store anymore. They go to the mall where they can get everything, as opposed to just a couple of things. And now look at what Amazon and the online retailers are doing to those big stores. They're reinventing, they're changing that model all over again, because Amazon just brings you whatever you want to your door. You don't even have to, you don't have to leave your house to get it. And then you get free returns and all that sort of stuff. So sometimes the businesses go out of business, or they close down, and nothing happens after a long time, because it's a horse in the era of the Model T. It just doesn't, there's no market for it anymore.
So before I let you go, what would you say to a business person who is looking at, maybe they've just started their business? When should they be thinking about the end of, is it ever too late or too early to start?
I don't think it's neither. I don't think it's ever too late or too early. And the latter probably confuses people more than anything, to say it's never too early. When you start a business, you really have to start with the end in mind, right? You have to figure out what's your goal here. I mean, and we're all very bad at that. I mean, and some people are great at it, but I think a lot of business owners are very bad at it. It's like, I started this business because I lost my job and I got laid off in the economic downturn, or I really wanted to do this. I wanted to follow my passions, or whatever. They start businesses for a lot of reasons, but nobody really thinks of the end when they're starting a business, because it's almost counterintuitive. It goes against your DNA to say, well, I'm just starting this business and I can't even figure out how to bring all the customers in, and I want to grow, and I've got all these great designs, and I got this plan. And you want to talk about how we're going to wind it down and shut the doors, or how I'm going to sell it off to somebody? Like, why don't you let me get going first before we talk about that? But I think as with any good plan, you've got to think of the end in mind. I may have said it to you before in conversation, or even on our last interview, but I always ask people, if anybody's ever climbed Mount Everest, and nobody, I don't know, I've never met anybody that has yet. I mean, hopefully I will someday. But and so then I say, well, if you're going to climb Mount Everest, what's the goal? And everybody says, oh, to get to the top. And I said, my goal is a little different. My goal is to get back down, right? Because getting to the top of Mount Everest is great, but I don't want to be that guy that got to the top and didn't get to come back down. So I'd rather go halfway up to the top and still come back down and live to climb back up again another day, than make it to the top and perish up there because I didn't plan the rest of it. So I don't think it's ever too early to start the planning. I'm not saying you need to do significant planning, but you need to have a goal in mind. You need to have a target. You need to think about what you really want. When do you want to get out? I mean, do you want to still be working in your dry cleaner when you're 80 years old, or do you want to have someone else do it, or do you want to retire and just take royalties and income off the business and let the business continue to make money and pay you a salary as an owner or dividends? Or do you just want to sell out and not have anything to do with it? So those types of things, thoughts and processes should come into play early on. the sooner you can start the planning, the better off. And I don't mean, 30 years early planning. I mean, again, thinking about it, I think you should. But I mean, I think 3 years, if you're within 3 years of thinking that you really want to be done, I think you better get real serious about it. 3 to 5 years, you're in a really good spot. And if you could start 10 years out, I think you're going to be in the greatest spot, because you get your financial house in order, your books and everything in order. That's the biggest deal killer for people when they sell businesses. They take all these deductions and they maybe don't report everything exactly how they should. And I'm not saying people cheat or anything like that, but maybe, when you're in business, things, the bookkeeping kind of can be a little funky sometimes. And the problem is, when I come in to buy that business and I'm going to do my due diligence, I'm going to scour your books. And if your books don't show the income to support the valuation that you're suggesting, I'm not going to pay for it. And you can't just look at me and say, "Oh, Brian, but yeah, well, we didn't report all the cash, or we had this over here, we had that over here." Like, I'm not interested. So now you're telling me, number one, it's not on the books, and you're telling me, number two, that you're dishonest, but then you're asking me to trust you. So if when business owners take some of those liberties, or they're writing off maybe more personal stuff than maybe what they should, and I'm not a tax attorney, and I don't work for the IRS, so I'm not going to give any opinions about any of that. Although you shouldn't be dishonest or take unsubstantiated deductions. But if they do that, and that's what their books say, you need to straighten that out. You don't want to turn those over to somebody else, because it's going to cost you money. I mean, you feel like you're saving tax money, or you're doing whatever today by really maximizing those expenses and deductions. But the reality is, you want to show your business, when you're going to sell it, as profitable as possible. You want to show as much income as possible, which takes time to change those accounting practices if you haven't been doing that right. And you want to make sure there aren't any liabilities. If people see crazy accounting practices, then they're worried about crazy, tax liabilities that may come back and haunt them later, or things may pop up down the road that they don't know about. So you definitely need that time, a couple of years to really straighten it out. And if you run a great ship, and if everything's in order, and you start 3 years ahead of time, then wonderful. You're even in better shape, because now you know it. You just keep doing it, and then you've got you just keep going about your business, and no harm, no foul. But that waking up in the morning and saying, I think on Monday, and saying, I think by Friday I want to be retired because I'm just done with it. It's really hard to do it well. To really get everything that you want out of your business, that you deserve out of your business.
Wow. So the big idea is you need to plan ahead, and it doesn't really matter if you're planning 30 years in advance, but at least 3 to get all your ducks in a row. Where can we find more information about you and your law practice?
Sure. You can find us online at atlantagaestateplanning.com. And there's all sorts of information about us and our practice. And there's videos and television interviews and information about my books that I've written, and all sorts of great stuff. So you can certainly find us there. There's a live chat link. So 24/7, if you want to speak with somebody who got a question, they will certainly be there to answer your questions. And we'd love to hear from you. If you heard us on the interview today, certainly reach out to us. Let us know what you think, and I'd love to chat about business. It's a passion of mine, is business planning in general. So I've always liked to exchange ideas and hear about different people's thoughts. And what I really love, and you may as well, Tammy, is talking about the Microsofts and the Apples. I love those stories of these small companies that grew out of a garage or a basement into something huge. And it doesn't have to be to that level, because I really truly believe that the small businesses in this country are the bedrock of our economy, and they make everything go. And so if you've got a story like that, I'd love to hear about it, just because it just gives me energy. I've got chills just thinking about the people that have done that, and the hard work and the ingenuity and everything, the creativity that people have. I'm absolutely fascinated by that. So I'd love to just, if nothing else, personally, just hear stories of people that are doing different things, because I can always learn. It is a constant process, and I like the topic, and I like to engage with people like that.
Well, I certainly enjoy engaging with you, and every time we speak, I learn something new, and it makes me, I start to get all these ideas, and I'm sure that's what's happening as our listeners hear the information that you're providing us and educating us about. Well, Brian, I really appreciate the time that you took with us today. And of course, I will invite you back again to talk about some other topic related to business and business innovations. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being here. Look forward to coming back.
This is Tammy Patzer. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to Business Innovators Radio. To hear all episodes featuring leading industry influencers and trendsetters, visit us online at businessinnovatorsradio.com today.